Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to our webinar. This is StormGeo's Healthcare Roundtable. I'm your host, meteorologist Dave Gorham. We're doing something a little bit different today. We are running 4 webcams
Welcome
rather
to the
than.
webinar. You have entered as and it's
Somebody's muted. Somebody needs to be muted. Let's see. I want to make sure that everybody's muted before we go much further. And it looks like now everybody is. Okay, but anyway, let me get back to my script. And usually when I'm doing a slide presentation, I'm not on camera and it doesn't look like I'm reading a script. But today I am on camera and I am reading a script. So let me go through this. We've assembled 3 experts from around the country to discuss business continuity as it relates to healthcare, but also business continuity in general, because I think all the discussion today will be regarding business continuity as it relates to businesses, not specific to healthcare. All of our experts have been tested by fire. And Scott, I think I remember the story that you told. Your first day on the job, you came into Indianapolis and there was a tornado warning for Indianapolis. Do I remember that right? Scott, are you muted?
Yeah, it was. And it's always interesting to me to see the response of people whenever they get a warning about a tornado or some imminent weather disaster of how they respond. And I think for most of my career, the looks that you see are, what am I supposed to do?
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a good time for me to be there and sort of establish our program. But it makes you worry about how well is everybody prepared to respond to a natural disaster.
Well, you were truly tested on your first day. Now, I'm going to introduce everybody in just a moment, but I want to introduce myself. As I mentioned, I am the webinar host. I'm a meteorologist here at StormGeo. For those of you unfamiliar with StormGeo, I'll tell you a little bit about us in just a moment. But as we proceed today, we will allow you to ask questions, of course, but we're going to hold the questions until the end. We'll have our roundtable discussion with our panel of experts, and then at the end, we will address your questions. And if for some reason we run out of time and I can't get to your questions, we will address those by email. So StormGeo, just a little bit about who we are. We are a global weather company, one of the largest commercial weather companies in the world. We have offices around the globe, including 7 regional forecast centers, providing specific 24/7 decision support for weather-sensitive operations. We do this each day of the year. As I mentioned, we have 7 forecast centers. One of those centers is here in Houston, where I'm speaking from today. We support a wide variety of industries from oil and gas, petrochemical, healthcare, retail, shipping, insurance, and many more. Now, let me take a moment to introduce our panel of experts. Depending on how you've got your webcams arranged, on the very right, you'll have David Hughes. David Hughes is the Associate Vice President, Enterprise Risk Management and Business Continuity Planning at HCA Healthcare in Nashville. David's background includes public accounting, internal auditing, Sarbanes-Oxley compliance, enterprise risk management, and business continuity planning. And he's been with HCA for 19 and a half years. Scott is in the middle, or Scott is second from the right on my screen. Scott and I have had webinars in the past before, so good to see you again, Scott. Scott is Vice President, Emergency Management, Environment of Care, and Safety at MedExcel. Scott oversees emergency management, environment of care, and safety for MedExcel. He provides vision and leadership, resulting in the development, implementation, and management of the organized, coordinated, and integrated emergency management, general safety, security, fire protection, life safety, and accident prevention programs. Now, Scott, you've been with MedExcel for just over 4 years. Prior to that, you were an adjunct instructor at LSU. Congratulations on the win this past weekend. And the National Center for Biomedical Research and Training. You are in Indianapolis today. Finally, all the way to the left, not all the way to the left, at least on my screen, I am all the way to the left, but James is second from the left. James Mitchell is the Director of Organizational Resilience at Texas Children's Hospital. James has been the director for over a year and was the assistant director prior to that. James has been with Texas Children's Hospital here in Houston for almost 4.5 years and was the service continuity manager at BP prior to that. That was also here in Houston. Gentlemen, are we ready? Shall I ask the first question?
Please do.
David?
Yes.
Okay, let's start with David. The first question: what preparations do you take in advance of hurricane season? And by that I mean building measures? Do you prepare buildings? What about emergency planning and that sort of thing?
We do a lot of planning. We're a pretty large system. We've got, and unfortunately, about half of our hospitals are in hurricane zones. So we've got a lot of facilities in Texas, Louisiana, Florida, and then up the East Coast as well. And so we have division meetings every year, even for the ones that are not in hurricane zone. We have the divisions will hold a meeting, bring in the emergency planners, and go over plans and talk about how they will work together when there's an event so they can support each other, and then corporate supports the divisions when there's a major event. But they refresh their plans, they do exercises, we do some training, kind of refresher on StormGeo. We make sure that everybody remembers their login. We send out information on that to make sure everybody can start getting the messages. I always say it's great when we have a storm early in the season that just fizzles out, because it gets everybody thinking
It's
about
a
it.
test.
Kind of a test. And then also our supply chain is engaged in that as well, because we have supply chain centers that support each of those hospitals in the division. And so they do preparedness, they have plans, and they do exercises as well. So all of them are engaged in the springtime to make sure that those plans are there and they've exercised them and updated their contact list, that type of thing.
And that's important because a lot of folks don't look at this type of information until there's a crisis or until there's a weather situation. And so for them to be able to drill or practice or get into the system and learn how to use it while they're not under the gun is a very useful and helpful thing. We see that here at StormGeo. Our clients will log in when there's a tornado warning or a severe weather warning, and that's not the way to do things. Scott, how about you? You've been doing this for a long time. You've got a lot of facilities across the country. What are your emergency preparations, and what do you do to take it, in advance of hurricane season? But this isn't necessarily a hurricane. We've done a lot of hurricane forecasting for MedXL, but the weather threat is not always a hurricane threat, and it's not always a Gulf Coast or Atlantic threat. You have tornadoes and ice and severe weather in Indianapolis and all across the country. So, what are your advanced emergency plans?
Great point, Dave. And our partnership with StormGeo has helped us with the snowfall that we're experiencing up north. We start with our national program, and one of the most important things I think we have with our program is accountability. So every single associate within our organization that works in safety and emergency management rolls up directly through my chain of command. And accountability is important because in very large organizations, you could have some standardized policies, processes, and procedures, but unless you can hold people accountable to them, then they're going to fail. The second thing is we have national contracts with vendors to provide food and shelters and remediation and all those other things, so that whenever we anticipate a weather event occurring or whether an event occurs, we can get resources that are needed. And the other thing we do nationally is, most healthcare executives don't receive training on emergency management. They don't take a class on should you evacuate or shelter in place, or how do you prepare 5 days out from a hurricane landing. And so our organization has over 200 incident command activations every year. And so we take that experience and we advise our leaders about, well, what is the best thing to do in this situation. And then we have regional directors throughout the country that manage that accountability day to day. And finally, at the local level, our hospitals that have weather events, whether it's snow or tornadoes or hurricanes, practice every year. For hurricanes, we start in January and we start disseminating information. In the spring, we're reviewing practices, policies, procedures. We're getting accountability of our organizations. And then in May, we're moving our extra supplies and then preparing for those storms that may come.
Scott, can you tell me how many facilities you're managing and how many people fall under that umbrella?
And we have 162 hospitals and over 2,600 sites of care across 21 states. and we have over 100 people in my direct chain of command that manage those day-to-day operations.
One of the great things about this roundtable and the people that we've assembled today is the vast wealth of experience that you have. This is not your first rodeo, and I have a feeling that we have people on that it might be their first or maybe second rodeo. And so I'm really happy that we've been able to assemble David and Scott and James. And so, James, that brings me to you. Texas Children's Hospital is just right up the road here in Houston from StormGeo. We have visited your offices, and you've been here to StormGeo on many occasions. We've both participated in each other's events. I spoke for one of yours yesterday, and you've spoken at ours in the past as well. So what are your procedures that you set up in advance of whether it's severe weather season or hurricane season?
So I would say that our preparations are very similar to what you've already heard from David and Scott. The one thing that I would add to that, though, is how important people are. Given that we're in healthcare and given that healthcare is a people-oriented business, it's absolutely essential that our staff show up and that they be prepared when we need them in response to any kind of disaster. And so for us, that begins the minute somebody walks in the door as a new employee. They attend new employee orientation, where the phrase is said to them repeatedly, everyone is essential. No one is non-essential personnel from our perspective. There's a role for everyone to play. And when we do annual required training, that same message gets emphasized again and again and again. As many hospitals do, we have a preparation team and a ride-out team and a recovery team, particularly in relation to large events like a hurricane. And so you've got people who are committed and signed up to be a part of that ride-out team. They've indicated that they have a personal disaster plan in place, that when they're called upon to come to the hospital and perhaps ride out for an extended period of time, that they will be there and they will respond. But the reality is, in the world in which we live today, whether it's a weather event or some kind of man-made disaster of some kind, people are going to be called upon who didn't sign up to be a part of the ride-out team. Maybe you got stuck at work because of a weather event, or maybe it was a terrorist event or civil unrest. There could be any number of things that cause you to have to stay at work longer than you had prepared to stay at work. And you have to have a culture in your organization where people say, you know what, I wasn't on the ride-out team, but I'm going to be there, I'm going to stay, and I'm going to serve our patients. And so that cultural element is essential.
And what I'm pulling from that is the term non-essential, because I think we all have non-essential and essential personnel. And the fact that on day one you say everyone's essential, that's probably key to their career and their job satisfaction, I would think.
No, it's absolutely essential. And when you combine that culture where people say, look, I will be there, I will show up, I'll respond when you need me, that puts it back on professionals like us to say, okay, there are things we need to do in terms of exercises. There are things we need to do in terms of notification to our staff when there's a significant event or a weather event. There's a whole range of things that we have to be prepared to do as professionals to honor that commitment that people have made. They're making that commitment to us, and so we need to make that commitment to them in terms of doing exercises, doing all the pre-planning that we can do in advance, contracting with a company like StormGeo so that we're able to give good data to our staff as to when they need to come in, and that we're concerned about protecting their safety, and that we're investing in things like emergency notification systems and news data, news alerts, and weather data, and so forth.
And James, something you just said goes back to something Scott said a moment ago, and that is third-party vendors. Whether it's a weather provider or whether it's emergency food or fuel, everybody has third-party vendors, and that, of course, means more money. So, Scott, we might talk about this a little bit later in our program, but talk a little bit about third-party vendors and what goes into selecting a vendor to help you through a period of severe weather.
Well, you know, the most important thing to us is that they have an ability to respond. I mean, our patients, our associates rely on us to have great emergency management plans, but we rely on our vendors to do that as well. And so our vendor selection process is somebody that has a national presence, and so they can draw upon a lot of resources, and somebody that has a plan that they're able to respond, that when you call them, they don't say, sorry, the weather's bad, we can't make it. And what we look for, and I think James and David will tell you this as well, is we look more for partners than we do for vendors. We want somebody that's going to be in it with us, that understands the value of us staying open and providing services to our communities in their most desperate times right after a disaster.
David, you want to follow on third-party vendors? Because here at
Sure.
StormGeo, we had the same situation. We had a vendor that was providing emergency fuel for our generator, and they couldn't follow through. So we now have a different emergency fuel vendor. But David, follow on.
Yeah, and we've had that same experience in years past, and especially down in Florida. And actually, one of the divisions down there decided they were not going to rely on somebody for fuel in the future, and so they actually leased space in a fuel depot that was close to them, and they store the fuel, and they have a couple of trucks that they use to be able to deliver the fuel to their facilities. And then at the end of the season, they have an arrangement where any fuel that's not used, they sell back. And so it's cost effective for them. We don't have to rely on anybody, but we don't do that in all markets. But in that market, they felt comfortable doing that, and they had access to a fuel depot. But it is critical that your vendors step up. And in Harvey, we had some that didn't step up, and they were. We aren't using those vendors anymore. So our supply chain looks closely at those and make sure that we've got vendors that can support that. We are pretty self-sufficient because we've got so many supply chain centers and so many other facilities that we rely on heavily on some remediation vendors, but we lease about 35 of the big generators every year so we can put them where we want them so that they can get in quickly when there's an event as a backup. And there's a lot of things we do with that. We contract with a helicopter aviation company to be able to have access to those, and we've got first right of refusal. So and it's somebody that doesn't contract with FEMA, so we can't have those taken from us. So we do it. You spend a lot of money, but when you have big events, you don't have those worries like you do if you're relying on somebody locally that you're not sure about.
As soon as you say helicopters, everybody says money.
Yeah.
James, for Hurricane Harvey, you were using the Army. Weren't you using the Army helicopters to support medicine deliveries, or was it staff? Remind me how that went.
So,
I mean,
oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
That question was for James and his
Okay, I'm
helicopter
sorry.
situation. Yeah.
So very similar to what Scott was saying, we look at vendors who can really partner with us rather than just being a vendor. It's not just about what's in the contract, but it's about what are you really capable of delivering? Do you understand our needs, and will you come through when we need you to come through? And in an event like Harvey, sometimes no matter how good those relationships are and how strong you have built your network, you're going to come up with something that you desperately need that people cannot get to you. And then your organization is very much dependent on the other relationships that it has built. So we had some critical pharmaceuticals that we needed delivered to our hospital and the medical center. No one could get those pharmaceuticals to us. Everyone was busy doing other things. Our vendors couldn't get it to us. Local authorities couldn't get it to us. And it just so happened that we had a member of our ride-out team who was a part of a National Guard helicopter unit in a city just north of us. And so he reached out to his contacts there, and as it turned out, they were looking for missions to run, and we're more than happy to put those pharmaceuticals we needed onto a Black Hawk helicopter. We had to find an appropriate place for them to land because as you can imagine,
It's a big
most
helicopter.
landing pads aren't going to handle a Black Hawk helicopter.
Mm-hmm.
But based on that relationship, we were able to reach out and get the things that we needed.
And that's not a phone number that everybody has, the Army helicopter delivery service.
No, that you can't Google them. They're not there.
You can't do that. You knew people in the right place at the right time. But as David said, sometimes you do need those special circumstances, and the time to get those contacts is before the storm or before the emergency.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, though, in looking at what resources you can find, because we had a similar experience with Katrina, and we ended up getting a hold of somebody that flew out to the oil rigs. They had helicopters, and they came and airlifted patients out they weren't medical helicopters at all, but you couldn't get any of them. And that was many, many years ago, but we saw the importance after that you need to have that service available.
Katrina changed a lot of things, didn't it? We all changed our plans because of what happened during Katrina. I want to ask the next question. I know you guys are all very experienced and your business continuity or your response plans are quite mature, very well fine-tuned. And so the question I want to ask is in 2020, what will be changed? What will be massaged? These plans, you've used them year after year, and every year there's maybe a little bit of a tweak. Have you still got things to tweak as we move into 2020? James, let's start with you.
So, as you said, there are always things that need to be tweaked and adjusted. From an emergency management perspective, Texas Children's has a long-standing, mature program that year over year we do the things we're supposed to do. We run exercises, we have real events, we do after-action reports that generate corrective actions. We track all of those things until they're done and done in a quality manner. And so from an emergency management perspective, it's very much as you described. It's just tweaking and fine tuning, adjusting job action sheets, making certain that we're doing the training we need to do with our leaders and with our staff, because like most institutions, we have a fairly high turnover rate. And so we need to ensure that as new people come in and they're given responsibilities, that we provide them that training. But additionally, though, I would say we're focusing very heavily on the traditional business continuity planning processes and adding that on top of our emergency management plans, ensuring, as we learned during Harvey, that when you're looking at a longer term event, more than 2 to 3 days, you can't focus just on critical patient care. You've got business operations that have to be back up and running again. How do we get those outpatient clinics open? How do we get revenue coming in and bills going out? And all of the things that make us a viable business have to be kept up and running as well, and cannot be stopped for 2, 3, or 4 or 5 weeks as we figure it out after the event. So a heavy focus on business continuity planning.
And Scott, how about MedXL, another very mature business continuity and disaster response plan that you've developed over the years? You've found things to tweak, I'm sure, as we move into 2020. What have you found?
Absolutely. And I think James hit on the head in his opening statement. We're really all about the people. And so in healthcare, it's pretty typical for healthcare organizations to hand out information or to do some training or webinars on preparing for a disaster. But what we found is 2 things. First of all, we have to better understand what our associates' needs are during a disaster. And secondly, we need better accountability. So we shouldn't just cross our fingers and hope that the people in housekeeping have a good emergency preparedness plan and ride it out. And we shouldn't guess as to what type of support they would need. So we have a program where we ask our associates every year about, well, what are your needs? If you're one of our physicians and you have 6 kids and your parents live with you and you have 6 dogs, we may want you to evacuate and care for your family and not have you be part of the team that embeds into the hospital before the storm. We may want you to come back after it's safe. But if we were to house you, we need to know that up front. And then we need to make sure that you're accountable to your plan. And so that's really important to us. The second thing is I have a TV in my office and I watch the national weather news during weather events. And I don't do it to get information about how we're going to react. But I've realized that all of our associates are watching those newscasts. And sometimes they can be a bit over the top. And our associates are reacting to it. So if I say, hey, StormGeo says this is what the weather is going to be, but they said, well, in the national news, I heard, Armageddon's coming. We're going to have to be able to explain that to them. And I will tell you, we've been using StormGeo since I've been here. They get it. And recently, during Hurricane Dorian, people commented on our conference calls. Oh, great, we got the StormGeo report. Do you know what they're saying on the national news?
Yeah.
And so that's something we want to be careful.
It is a little different, isn't it? I think anybody who's toured here in Houston, our StormGeo Operations Center, the first thing they see is that we have the Weather Channel on in our operations. And no, it's not where we get the forecast from, but we need to know what our clients are seeing because our clients are watching the Weather Channel. And sometimes our story is different from that of the Weather Channel. And whether it's the weather or whether it's the national news, I think the real story as it affects a location, specifically one of your facilities, is going to be different than the national news and the way they're reporting it. David, I want to continue this about third parties. Or third-party vendors, do you incorporate third-party vendors into your response planning? Do you include them as valued members of your team?
We do. In fact, the aviation company actually has a representative in our emergency operations center when we activate. GE, who does a lot of our biomedical, they're in the command center. They have a representative in the command center as well. And then our remediation teams that we use, are closely linked in. The generator company that we use, that we lease from, is closely linked in too. So, and then our supply chain works closely with all of those and with supplies that we might need, in addition to what is brought in early. If it's a hurricane, you can pump a lot of things into the facilities ahead of time, before the weather gets bad. And that's critical to know, when that's going to stop, when that window is going to end, so you can get all the supplies in that you can.
James, I know you drill with your vendors. What are some of the things that you have? What are some of the activities that you involve your third-party vendors in?
So we try to get external parties involved as much as we can into our tabletop exercises, particularly because it helps them understand our internal decision-making processes. They need to understand how we're making decisions, what our triggers look like, and we need to understand from them, what are their triggers on their side? What are the things they're looking at in terms of how they do their preparedness and when they're ready to respond to an event? In addition to that, it also helps to build those relationships that you're so heavily dependent on when a real event occurs. If you've sat across the table from someone, had a conversation with them, that really goes a long way when you're in an emergency and you desperately need their help. If you've had that opportunity to make a more personal connection.
And Scott, you too, I see you nodding your head. Do you involve your third-party vendors?
We do, and it's important that we don't put our vendors into a bad spot either through this. And so, as James said, understanding what our trigger points are and how we react and make decisions. So every administrator, every CFO would love to wait until 2 hours before landfall to make a decision about whether or not you're going to bring a generator in town and spend that money, and you can't do that. We found that you really need to do that 72 hours out. And Dave, at 72 hours out, the thing could be heading to Florida and end up hitting Texas 5 days later.
Right.
But you need to spend that money. And so they understand that, but they also understand that when we call them, they're going to deliver exactly what we need.
I want to jump back just a bit because, David, I think I didn't get your 2020 plans. I got it from James and Scott, but I jumped ahead with the right question, but I didn't give you a chance to answer the question. The question before this current question was, your mature plan will receive some tweaks in 2020, I'm sure. What might those tweaks entail? What are the lessons that you learned in 2019 that you had not learned in 2018?
Yeah, we go through a process every year, but we really made a lot of changes in 19 related to the hurricanes in 18. And so we found, every one you learn something different, but we learned that we don't know, we've got a lot of hospitals, and so we don't know all the details of facility infrastructure and all the, surrounding areas for that hospital and the risk. And so coming out of Michael, we had some devastating damage there. In the year before, we decided to put together a database, and we've got 180 point data points on each hospital now, basically, so we know everything from where's the alternate landing pad for helicopters to do they have hookups if we bring in water tankers, where's the hookup for the, do they have quick connects for the generators, do they have a well, all of those types of things. How close are they to a river or a creek that may flood? How far are they from the coast for storm surge? And so we've got all of those laid out now so that we don't have to ask those questions during the event or just prior to the event when they're trying to prepare. And so that's helped a lot. And now that we've got that built, we can just refresh it each year. But it helped a lot this year with Dorian when we were preparing for that, because we had a lot of those data points and all those facilities, and we knew, the windows in the building, how strong are those? Is it an old hospital, or has it got, very strong new hurricane windows and that type of thing? So that was a big jump from the year before. And then also just we do an after action report, and Michael, we did a real extensive one. We always do one, but we went down there and interviewed the people at the hospitals, and then we also at division, at corporate, and put together a huge after action report, listing all the good and bad, and then put together a work plan from that and assign tasks to get all that done. And so all that was done this year before, majority of it before hurricane season started. So we felt much better about some of the things that we found through that after action report.
I think all your comments are interesting, because I think a program that's in its infancy or only 1 or 2 years of development under its belt, it's very easy to say, oh, what do we do if the power goes out? Or what do we do if we flood? But it's the things that you gentlemen are doing as you tweak your system to make it better and better. It's the little things, like corporate headquarters needs to know where the alternate landing zone is for the helicopter for a hospital that is on the other side of the country. That's probably not the first thing that you address when you're devising or building an emergency plan, but those are the kind of things that take your business continuity to the next level. It's the little things, and it's what helps a plan become mature and well practiced and well developed. The next question I have for you, we're talking about seasonal weather events. Everybody on the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast knows that hurricane season begins June 1. So we don't build our hurricane response plan on Memorial Day weekend, the day before June 1st. Same with severe weather. There's a spring and a fall severe weather season. You don't wait until the first tornado warning to devise your severe weather response plan, and you don't wait for the first snowfall to figure out who's going to shovel or plow your driveway. So how much in advance, Scott, do you plan for your seasonal weather events? Are you starting 2 weeks out, or are you starting the year before? Something in between.
It's a continuous process. At the end of hurricane season, we're reviewing what happened during hurricane season and making plans for next season. At the end of the snowstorm season, we're doing the same thing. At the end of tornado season, it's the same thing. And then during the seasons as well, we're making changes. So it's never my calendar says today we're going to look at our hurricane or snowstorm or tornado or flooding plan. It's a very continuous process. And that's important, because the lessons that you're going to learn are going to be immediately available during and after that storm, but 6 months later, they're going to fade away. And so we want to make sure we capture that.
Right. James? We don't have a snow season here, but we have an ice potential. So when do you start planning for these weather seasons?
Exactly. Well, there are two things that were interesting that David and Scott both said. So David was given this lengthy list of all the data points they like to gather about their sites. And I think that's a phenomenal thing to do, because what I always tell everyone that does this kind of work is you're going to improvise. No situation will ever develop exactly the way your plan is written. And so your goal is to see to it that you're improvising at the highest level that you possibly can, that you work out everything in advance as possible. And so when you're improvising around some of the minor details, not trying to figure out everything completely from scratch. And then, like Scott said, it's an ongoing process. When I arrived at Texas Children's 4.5 years ago, there was a tendency whereby hurricane preparations were done in March, April, and May. And then if we didn't get something done, then we just really wouldn't think about it again until the following year. And it struck me as rather odd that we weren't constantly seeking to be at a better state of preparedness, because it's not always about a hurricane. It could be a flooding event, some kind of man-made disaster. There's a range of things that your preparations can be applied to that whole all hazards approach that we're supposed to be looking at. And so, from our perspective, when we're thinking specifically about hurricanes in January and February, we're ensuring that we've updated our emergency facility use maps with particular attention to during a hurricane, where are people going to sleep? Then as we move into March and April, we're looking to see who needed training, who needs their training refreshed, whether it's incident command principles or regional tools. And then we always seek to have a large scale tabletop hurricane exercise just to refresh people's mind as to what are we doing and why are we doing it. One of the reasons I think why we were so successful during Harvey is we were very fortunate that in early June of 2017, we conducted an incident command for leaders class with about 50 of our executives. 2 weeks later, then we conducted a large scale tabletop exercise over about 3 hours involving pretty much 150 to 175 of our incident command team members. So when Harvey comes along, we're trained, we're exercised, we are prepared to do the things that we needed to do. And that rhythm that starts in January and takes us through about the middle of June is something we try to do every year.
And I want to stress throughout this program, we're talking about weather, but we don't have to be talking about weather specifically. As an example, here at StormGeo, we had some demolition of a tenant upstairs from us. And through that demolition, we lost water to the building. And so we were without water here for 24 hours. That is one of the situations that is not weather, but falls under this business continuity umbrella. And I'm sure each of our experts can relate, whether it's an active shooter or a simple construction project that takes the electricity off or the water for the building. You've got to be able to cover those types of scenarios as well. Scott, do you have a particular remembrance of something that wasn't weather related that popped up all of a sudden that was an uh-oh kind of experience?
Yeah, we have utility failures are probably the biggest one, and as well as workplace violence events. And so if you have the structure in place for emergency management, which is something happens, people know what their immediate action is, and then they know who to call to help. If you have that for any emergency, then your program's going to work. And I'm sure James and David would agree that it's those first few minutes, like the tornado warning I came into, where people are either going to know what to do and they're going to get the right people there and have the first great immediate actions, or they're going to look around and wonder what to do. That's what's going to make or break the event. We can bring all the resources and the helicopters in after that, but those first few moments are critical for any disaster. And that's why we try to keep it very simple for our people to understand, do a couple first steps, call the other people in so that they can help you manage it.
And David, you too, I'm sure you have a story about something not weather related that put your business continuity plan to the test.
Yes, the more of the emergency preparedness of the business continuity too. We had when they had the shooting incident out in Vegas, and they had all those patients. Our hospital was the closest to the site there in Las Vegas, and we got over 200 patients within the first hour and a half after that event. And there was 120 gunshot wounds, and so you can imagine that that's not something you drill for, but it was interesting. We had been in the week before doing emergency preparedness training, and they called that out as being very helpful because they had a comfort level from the week before that their lists were updated. They knew who to contact. They brought the right people in, and we could have never planned for an event like that, but they responded unbelievably and saved a lot of lives that night. You don't think of something happening that severe and that quickly that you don't, and we couldn't really do anything much from corporate because it happened so quickly. And they got supplies from other hospitals and got some surgeons from other hospitals, and it all came together, but it's not something that you really can plan for.
And I think that goes to what James was saying a moment ago about improvisation. You've got your experts that are on the site, but they haven't drilled for this particular event. But because they're well educated and well trained in all these different areas, they're able to improvise and move in the right direction.
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's interesting what Scott said, because the way he described the basics of what we're trying to do is exactly the way I describe it to our senior leaders. Like, you're trying to figure out what happened. You're gathering data. You pull the right people together to make decisions, and then you have to be able to communicate outwards. What are the decisions that we just made? What do people need to do based on what we've decided? We had an event in early 2016. It was internal pipe break that caused flooding across 7 floors of one of our buildings. That was approximately 5 months after I arrived at Texas Children's. Our emergency notification system was garbage. Our ability to pull people together quickly in an emergency was ineffective. And so it took a good couple of hours to get that notification out to people that, hey, this is what's happened. Here's what we need you to do. Here are the actions that you need to take. And so, again, we were improvising, but we were improvising at a very low level, trying to get the basics done. We had a comparable incident later in 2017 after we'd implemented a new emergency notification system and done drills and done training around how do we respond to an incident like this, such that we were able to pull together a hybrid virtual on-site command center within 15 to 20 minutes of notification to get all the right people together so that they could then improvise around how do we respond to this flooding event. And we weren't trying to improvise around how do we get people together. We figured that out. We got people together, let them make decisions, and then communicated out to the organization what people needed to do. And those exact same principles, whether it's a weather event or a building being flooded or an active shooter, whatever it is, the principles are the same.
I have a question. This isn't one of the questions that we talked about earlier. So forgive me if I catch you off guard with this question, but I wanted to ask, I think we've kind of assembled a dream team here. All of you guys are experienced and you're working in mature programs, but I have a feeling that some of the folks that are listening to this presentation don't have that luxury. They may be looking at business continuity as an additional duty, something that they do after their real job is complete. Do we have any advice for those type of folks that might be looking at this or listening to this presentation and saying, everything that you guys have just said is great, but it just isn't my reality? James, do you want to start?
Yeah, so where that's concerned, I understand very much the challenge of making the case for a business continuity program, particularly when a lot of the pushback you'll get from your senior leaders is, we have emergency management, we don't need business continuity. So I don't know who all is on the call, but if you are a senior leader in your organization and you're listening to this, you need to understand that there's somebody in your organization who desperately needs your help and your support from an executive level to support a business continuity program. If you are the person who's actually trying to implement a business continuity program, you need to be able to articulate why it is that you need the program. You need to be able to articulate the differences between emergency management and business continuity and talk about the improved return on investment that can be gained by getting operations up and running more quickly because you've done the pre-planning around how do you bring a part of your organization back up that was not a part of your shelter in place. And so in relation to that, you need to understand what order in which things need to be brought back. Is it a patient service concern? Is it a financial concern? Is it a regulatory concern? You have to understand the business drivers behind why you're making the decisions you're making about what parts of your business need to come back online first with the limited and scarce resources that you have available to work with. So
and James, as we mentioned yesterday, I'm sorry to interrupt, but as we mentioned yesterday, this is all, people are writing checks to cover these types of positions. We do not generate revenue for the company. We are a cost to the company. So it's often a difficult battle to fight.
Yeah, it's a very difficult battle to fight because, again, you're not generating that immediate revenue that comes into the organization. You're protecting the organization against a threat that we all know is likely to materialize, but in the minds of a lot of senior leaders who are responsible for setting budgets, they think that we're trying to set up a program to defend against something that is, in their view, perhaps unlikely to happen. And so, I know that David, you're involved with the enterprise risk program in your organization. I have responsibility for enterprise risk in my organization, and it helps to have that opportunity to talk to senior leaders about the reality of the risks we face and how emergency management and business continuity combine together to help mitigate significantly some of those risks.
And Scott, any advice for the person on this program or listening to this program who might be having to deal with business continuity as an additional duty?
Yeah, and listen, we've all been there. We've been in that basement office, right? That used to be a closet, struggling to try to get anything done. I would disagree with you, Dave. I think we are revenue generating. And I think as business continuity and emergency management professionals, we have to change the conversation because we've been shooting ourselves in the foot. Don't put on your email tagline that no plan survives first contact with the enemy. Because then your CFO is going to say, well, why the heck am I paying you to plan when it's not going to work anyways? Don't say that you're just regulatory, because that's how the executives think of us.
Mm-hmm.
When you can keep that facility open and functioning through a disaster and not only serve your community in their greatest time of need, but continue to see patients and generate revenue, that's the example. We have countless examples every year of a water main breaking in a town and the 2 local hospitals closing, and we stay open full service. Or losing our power substations and bringing in 12 generators for 2.5 months so we could stay open and offer full service and support our community and generate revenue. And that's the conversation that we need to have with the executives, that
Yep.
I'm going to keep you open, fully functional. And also, when those other hospitals in the region or businesses are closing, and we've shown the community that you can come to us and trust us, that's going to build a better relationship with the community.
Excellent. Excellent. You've changed my mind. How
Yeah,
about you, David?
I totally agree with Scott. It's about we've been very fortunate because our leadership, we've gone through several CEOs since I've been here, and they've all been very supportive, and they've seen that that this program is to protect our patients, protect our employees. It's not necessarily about keeping the cash flow running. It's making sure that we don't lose any patients, we don't lose any employees. We do whatever it takes to do that, and also to support the community and keep the doors open. So with our hospital that got heavily damaged with Michael, it was full of water. I mean, took part of the roof off, blew all the windows out. We kept our emergency room open because it was the only emergency services there. The other hospital that was in the area closed. We had a helipad and we had an emergency room, and so anybody that needed additional care was flown to another hospital. But we kept that emergency room open until the hospital reopened, and that was great for the community. And we got a lot of good PR from the community about being able to support them and not have to drive 60 miles to the nearest hospital if they were clearing trees and cut their leg with a chainsaw or something, or fell off a roof. So it was a great service to the community, but that was what it was all about, is supporting employees, patients, and the community that we serve.
All of those answers are excellent, and I'm glad I threw that question into the mix. I didn't prepare you guys for that, so all of those answers were off the cuff, and I appreciate it, because that might be one of the most important things we just talked about, being able to respond quickly, and all of that was great. Next question. Dealing with atypical weather scenarios. We have some hurricanes that will give you 5 days advance notice. There are other hurricanes that will give you 18 hours notice. In Tornado Alley, a hurricane, severe thunderstorm advisory might come out for the western part of the county, but suddenly the eastern part of the county is experiencing the tornadoes. When you have prepared for something that doesn't happen, it goes back to what James said, improvising perhaps, but maybe the forward-thinking business continuity person has already developed plans for things that can happen on a normal time scale, but then again, might not. Now, David, how do you deal with a hurricane that gives you no notice, or a tornado that gives you no notice, or a forecast that yesterday said the precipitation would be rain, but now today it's freezing rain and none of your folks can travel?
I mean, you just prepare for being able to respond, to be flexible, and to know that those kind of things are happening. We had, an example would be like that we had the earthquake a year or so ago up in Alaska. We have a facility up there in Alaska. It's a remote area, and it was pretty heavily damaged. But and we realized we probably didn't have as good a plan for that as we needed, because it's just so hard to get to and so hard to support. But they had plans, and they got through it, and they stayed open and supported employees, and we ended up putting people up there to help support the employees and help support the hospital. So we brought in people from other hospitals to help support them.
Scott, do you have plans for the weather event that doesn't go quite as advertised?
We do, and Dave, David Hughes introduced me to StormGeo, so thank you, David, for doing that. But
Thank you,
to
David.
me, for all these events, whether you have notice or don't have notice, the key is having accurate information. So it's great to know that there's an ice storm coming to Indianapolis, but how is it going to affect St. Vincent's Indianapolis Hospital, or our Carmel or Fishers Hospital? That's what's really key to me. And then how is it going to affect our associates in the other area? With that key information, with that accurate information that we get from StormGeo, and to be honest, I'm amazed that weather is one of the greatest hazards we face, and yet people rely on a $500 TV to figure out what's going to happen. But when we have that pinpoint information, then we can make very detailed decisions, and we can make decisions that our associates and our patients and communities are going to trust. And so we can react to it, whether it's shelter in place, whether it's hold a shift over, whether it's getting out our four-wheel drive vehicles to get people to work or to take them home, or getting extra food service delivery. All of that is based upon very accurate weather information that StormGeo provides to us.
And let me add to that, Scott, that accurate information sometimes changes. As a meteorologist for a really long time, I can say that sometimes the forecast is wrong, and sometimes it changes, and sometimes it's a fluid situation where it's difficult to get a handle on it. One of the most difficult things that we can forecast is freezing rain, and the way it impacts traffic and the way it impacts power lines and safety and mobility is tremendous, but it's a fluid situation that changes, and the forecast could be quite dramatic in the period of 12 hours, 6 hours. It can change a lot. So you're right, being able to have the most accurate and up-to-date information, and geez, I'm starting to sound like a commercial for StormGeo, but the ability to talk to our meteorologist can really be the difference between having the right information and not having the right information, or the most useful information. But James, let me ask you, dealing with atypical weather, dealing with weather that isn't going quite according to plan, have you dealt with situations like that before? Are there special considerations? For instance, one of the StormGeo products is called the worst case scenario related to hurricanes. And that part of our forecast considers, what if the forecast is wrong? What if everything of the forecast goes wrong and the storm takes the most direct and speedy path to your front door? So we are looking at that type of situation where the forecast or the meteorology isn't quite as good as it should be. What do you do in those cases?
So again, I'm afraid this is going to sound a bit like a commercial for StormGeo as well, but Hurricane Harvey is a perfect example of a weather event that developed in an incredibly strange and unusual way. So when you go back and look at the daily predictions for the path for Harvey, it was swinging wildly from Mexico to Houston to Mississippi and then back again. And whenever the path finally settled down and it seemed like it was going to go to Corpus Christi, which is well to our south, and we should typically be out of danger with a storm that's going to Corpus Christi, yet on the national weather and local weather, we're still hearing strange things like, well, we may get 50 inches of rain out of this, which we would be inclined to dismiss. But because it was developing in a very unusual way and there was so much uncertainty, we stepped up the number of calls that we had with StormGeo, and they were confirming the really high rainfall totals. And because we developed a relationship with those meteorologists, because everyone we were on the phone with was someone we had talked to before, we dealt with before, we were confident in the quality of the data that we were getting. Harvey was never hitting our traditional hurricane triggers. So if we were just looking at our triggers and just looking at the exact path that was forecast for Harvey, we wouldn't have been taking action. Yet, based on the information we were getting, we knew something unusual is developing here. We need to go ahead and prepare just as if it were a hurricane, even though it wasn't a hurricane when it came here. And so that kind of atypical event, again, you're improvising, but you're improvising with quality data and with good plans that you've already put in place and tested.
Thanks, James. And with that, I think we're going to wrap this up. I'm going to ask each of you for your final thoughts or takeaways, but the hour has gone by very quickly, and it'll be Christmas before we know it. So in fact, there's only just 35 days of shopping left. Lindsay, she's my handler over there. She's shaking her head that I brought that up. But final takeaways. David, let's start with you.
Sure. I would just say make sure that you do the training, you do the prep, the exercises. Make sure, as Scott had said, that the employees have their own personal plans and are ready to respond and be able to support the hospital. We ask a lot of our people because we ask them to stay, if they are able to support our patients. So. Just be proactive on all that and get good support from leadership.
Scott, just a couple of minutes. What have you got?
Yeah, develop as many relationships as you can. So I spend my free time traveling to DC, traveling to state capitals, meeting people, greeting people, talking to people like David and other emergency managers and business continuity professionals. And I say that half my salary goes to my Rolodex because developing those relationships, whether they're people you can call and ask a question or somebody you can call and collaborate with during a disaster, or just share some best practices, those are the keys to really getting you through a disaster. And even if it's a part-time job or an additional job to you, those people, those relationships can get you through a disaster and get you to a better place in your role.
Thank you, Scott. James, in about 30 seconds or so, what are your final thoughts?
I'm going to echo what David and Scott said. Take care of your people so they will take care of you, and have a cup of coffee with people well in advance. Get to know them, because those relationships will carry it through when it really matters.
And maybe become involved in your local chapter of the Association of Continuity Professionals.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for that. Yeah.
Yeah, a plug there. That's going to do it, everybody. I want to thank all of our professionals with us today, David Hughes, James Mitchell, and Scott Cormier. We've had a great discussion over the last hour. I want to give contact information for David Hughes. It's david.hughes3@hcahealthcare.com. James Mitchell also has a 3 in his. It's jamitch3@texaschildrens.org. And for Scott, it's Scott Cormier. Cormier is CORMIER. And Scott, you pronounce the R at the end, right?
Correct.
Yes. And so it's Scott Cormier at MedExcelFM Facilities Management, I believe, .com.
Scott.Cormier.
Scott.Cormier at MedExcelFM.com. And I am Dave Gorham, dave.gorham@stormgeo.com. That's it, everybody. We're going to wrap this up. If you have any questions, please feel free to email any of our experts or me. If you'd like to learn more about StormGeo, please visit stormgeo.com. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody, and the holidays will be here before you know it. Happy shopping. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks again, gentlemen.
Thank you.